Arsenal have made a bid for Brentford's Christian Norgard. Would this be a signing that improves us? We'll bring you some instant reaction to the news here on this bonus episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. Let's get into it. Hey everybody, how are we doing? Welcome back to another episode of the pod, a bonus episode of the pod. Won't be a particularly long one, coming to you, half an hour after we ended the live stream of this morning's episode. So this is a bit of extra content for you to sink your teeth into. Sod's law, isn't it? Had I stayed live on the previous edition for 2 minutes more, we would have been able to react live to that breaking news that Arsenal are exploring a deal for Brentford's Christian Norgard, and that is according to David Ornstein. Literally, guys, the minute I hit the end stream button, I picked up my phone, looked at my notifications, and there it was. David Ornstein reporting that Arsenal have made a bid. They've gone as far as making a bid for Christian Norgard. Now, credit to, I think it was Henky Ho, who said that this was the case while we were sort of going through the live stream, talked about the fact that Arsenal had made that offer. There was somebody in the chat saying that the reports were coming out of Denmark. Obviously, that's been followed up by David Ornstein. And I said at the time that I didn't really want to see us pay big money for Christian Norgard. I said, and I referenced the report that had come out 3 hours prior, which said something to the effect of Brentford are demanding £45 million for Christian Norgard because Tottenham, with Thomas Frank now at the helm, was said to be interested in the player and taking him to the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. So my view on this was very simple. Not sure that Christian Norgard in any way, shape or form represents not just an upgrade, but not even a sort of equal standard of player as Thomas Partey. And then you talk about a £45 million potential figure. And I'm thinking, no, this is crazy. This is nonsense. Look, my opinion on Christian Norgard as a player remains the same. But at £9 million, now you're talking about something I could probably just about get behind in terms of the value. And I talked about risk versus reward. And for £9 million, I'd imagine that Brentford will probably demand a little bit more than that. But hey, let's say even if it goes up to £15 million, I think it's a signing that, wouldn't be a bad one to put it. Like I'm trying to stay calm and polite about this. Look, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Forget the trying to stay calm and grounded and calculated and measured approach. Forget all of that, right? Just throw that out the window for a second. If I just bring you my raw reaction to the news that Arsenal have made a £9.3 million bid for Christian Norgard, here it is. You're telling me that Arsenal are going to let Thomas Partey walk out of the door to go and bring in Christian Norgard? How in any way, shape or form does that improve Arsenal's midfield options? I know Zubimendi's coming in, and it's pretty clear that Zubimendi is going to be the starting six. And so I understand and realize that at this stage, we're looking for a player probably who's going to be the backup to Martin Zubimendi. But let's not forget that Martin Zubimendi is going to be new to the Premier League, is going to have to adjust, is going to have to adapt. And that's partly why I was such a big advocate of the idea of keeping Thomas Partey, because I felt like if Zubimendi came in with somebody there who already knows the role, who understands the role, who can play it to perfection, who gets every single aspect of what Mikel Arteta demands, what the Premier League demands, what the transition from Spain to England is like, that could be a real big help to Martin Zubimendi. That's how I looked at it. And then I started to think about, okay, well, Jorginho's gone, so regardless, we might need another midfielder anyway. And if Thomas Partey goes, we definitely need another midfielder. But I started to think about the fact that actually Partey playing a somewhat reduced role, if that is indeed how it would pan out and go, that wouldn't be a problem for us, really. And I don't think it'd be too much of a problem for Thomas Partey, who's got to manage his fitness very, very carefully, who's got to manage his minutes, etc., etc. So I felt like keeping Partey and bringing Zubimendi in to take on that role, but having that safety net of Thomas Partey in the background would be perfect. But can you hand on your heart say that the duo of Martin Zubimendi, who's yet to play in the Premier League, and Christian Norgard would be a better duo than Partey and Jorginho. Now, I know Partey and Jorginho are at certain stages in their careers where you don't know how long they've got left at the really, really top level. And that sounds reductive to say because they've both been great footballers throughout their careers, all of that stuff. But my question here is, how are we improving? How are we improving? Now, the other option that people have been talked about is Lucien Agume from Sevilla. Not massively convinced by him. And again, I was very, very dismissive of the chat the other day when people were saying we were going to go and pay 20 million, 25 million euros for the player. I said that was way too much money for a player of that track record. Christian Norgard, I feel more comfortable about being able to come into the side and do a solid job. Let me be clear. Let me be clear in my feelings and thoughts on Christian Norgard. I work for BBC London. I've commentated on Brentford games. I've reported on Brentford games. I've followed Brentford pretty closely. I'm a massive fan of the job that Thomas Frank did there. I'm a huge fan of the way they recruit. I think they've managed to take a football club that has no right in terms of its size and stature to be in the Premier League and establish them as a Premier League football club. You probably won't find many people that will speak about Brentford and some of their individuals, including Christian Norgard, in better terms than me. I think he's a good player. But is he an Arsenal-level player? I don't think so. Then you start to explore it a little bit more, and people will say, well, you know what? To be fair, he's coming in as a backup, and I accept that, and I understand that, and I'm not losing my head about this. But I just don't think that going and spending money on Christian Norgard when you could go a little bit further to keep Thomas Partey is the right course of action. From a purely footballing perspective, leave the rest of the stuff out of it. From a purely footballing perspective, Zubimendi and Norgard is a very, very risky way to go into a season that you're expected to deliver big in. I think Norgard's got a lot of really good qualities. I think he's a good passer. I think he's a great destroyer. I think the way he goes and seeks danger and puts out fires, I think he's really good at all of that. I think he's really, really aggressive physically. He's what Mikel Arteta loves in terms of that build, that stature, the strength, all the rest of it. He's got all of those things going for him. It's not that I don't like Christian Norgard. It's that in a summer where Arsenal are supposed to be making signings to take that next step and are supposed to be making signings to get us over the line, it feels like we're shopping in the bargain basement again. You know, you think about, you know, what we've done in the goalkeeping position, Kepa Arrizabalaga. I don't mind that so much. I know this probably falls into a similar category, that falls into a similar category when we're talking about players that are available on the cheap and whatever. But a backup goalkeeper, I feel like you can afford to cheap out on that. I don't know that you can afford to cheap out on another midfield player when, for me, there are still a lot of question marks about Martin Zubimendi, the time it's going to take him to adapt, whether he's going to be able to kind of hit the ground running. I just think, you know, the more this window goes on, you know, it feels like we're in a bit of a deadlock with the strikers, whether that's to do with money or not, or other things. I'm not entirely sure at this stage. It would be wrong of me to kind of really go big on one opinion or the other when it comes to that. But I just look at it and I'm like, so far, Zubimendi, who's a good midfield player, a very good midfield player, but, you know, needs probably some time to come up to speed. And then I think about Kepa coming in and then maybe Christian Norgard, and I'm just not particularly inspired. Now, I can't help feeling that way. And I'm sure there'll be many, many Arsenal fans out there that feel that way. Equally, I think we owe it to Arsenal and to Arteta to, at points, just kind of take a step back and try and put a lid on those emotions and just see how these things pan out. Because I think a lot of people reacted the same when we signed Jorginho for a very, very similar amount. But when Jorginho came in, I think it became apparent that he really did help the squad. And the squad benefited from having his experience, his know-how, his very, very specific individual skill set. And I think actually that turned out to be a really good bit of business. It's all dependent, isn't it, on what you see the role of the player being. Christian Norgard, I think, is a better bet as a backup central midfield player than Lucien Agume. But the truth is, I'm not particularly inspired by any of them. And maybe it's because I'm so desperate to see us get over the line. Maybe it's because I'm desperate to see us go on and win the Premier League or the Champions League and whatever. I don't know. But I'm really looking at a lot of the players that we're being linked with right now, and I'm struggling to see how they take us to the next level. And it goes back to a point that I made a lot last summer where we were talking about the need to not just raise the ceiling, but raise the floor. And I think we were successful in raising the floor. If we hadn't raised the floor, I don't think we would have finished second last season, given all the circumstances and the way everything unfolded. But in order to take that next step, I think we've got to go a little bit further. And I'm all for spotting market opportunities, and I'm all for trying to take advantage of really good deals that are maybe on the market and that present themselves. And I'm certain that Christian Norgard, by the way, will want to join Arsenal Football Club. But I don't know, man. And again, look, with maybe some deeper analysis, we'll do a scouting video on Christian Norgard. Maybe after that, my opinion will slightly change. I mean, my opinion on Martin Zubimendi slightly changed when I sort of dove into him a little bit. I've got my opinion on a player and I've got my view on a player. And one thing I'll never be is stubborn and pig-headed. And I will, if I think I'm wrong, cycle back on stuff. And I will say, no, actually, you know what? I was wrong about this and I was wrong about that. And I hope I'm wrong about this. But this is not necessarily about Christian Norgard as an individual. This is about Arsenal in general, in my view, perhaps not being ambitious enough to go on and take that next step and get us over the line. Because this signing might be smart, it might be efficient, it might be good value for money, given that we've made a bid of £9.3 million. But is it a signing that's going to move the needle? Because we need to move the needle. That's where Arsenal are at now. We need to move that needle a little bit more. It's not just about maintenance of our level. In terms of maintaining our level, this feels like a decent signing. You lose Jorginho, you go and bring Christian Norgard in. That's all right. You replace Thomas Partey, because for a long time it felt like Zubimendi was coming in. We were going to keep Partey as well. And so Zubimendi will be the Jorginho replacement. And then you're looking at it through a lens where you're going, actually, that is making us better, because now we've got Partey Zubimendi rather than Partey Jorginho. But the minute you take Thomas Partey out of the question, the minute you take Thomas Partey out of the equation and it becomes Zubimendi and Norgard, that's where alarm bells ring, because it's not just about the players. It's about the fact that we're having to, while trying to reconstruct our front line this summer, which is something that I think we need to do, we're also having to reconstruct our midfield. And should we be in a position where we're having to manage this much change this summer? I don't know. I don't know about that. So that's where I'm a little bit worried. And listen, I got my rant out of the way. I know there'll be a lot of people in the chat that really like Christian Norgard and think he's a really good player and would be a really, really good addition to the squad. And let me be clear, it's not really about Christian Norgard here. You know, I know he's the subject of this bid and he's the player that we're talking about, but it's more about the bigger picture. You know, if you go and sign, I don't know, let's say we went and signed, and I know it would never happen, but let's say we went and got Fede Valverde, right? Who for me is one of the best midfielders in the world. And then you bought Christian Norgard in. I go, oh, okay. Quite like that. It's all about the overall package. That's how you look at the transfer window for me. You can look at individual signings and you can make cases for all of them that say, yep, this makes sense. And you can make cases for others that say, no, this doesn't quite make sense. I think it's about the overall package and overall collective. And so is a midfield of Zubi and Norgard better than Partey and Jorginho? It might be. And I suppose the bit that I'm overlooking is that you could probably start to expect a decline from Partey and Jorginho now. And therefore, maybe you'll see with that potential of Zubimendi and Norgard coming in, maybe you can see us push past that. I don't know. Is Declan Rice going to play a different role next season? You know, there's a lot of unanswered questions, but my initial reaction to this is this Arsenal being as ambitious as they should be? And it's not necessarily about the money, by the way, because if a player's available and is a great fit and is available on the cheap, I'm not one of those people that will scream for people to spend money for no apparent reason, just because, you know, I want to talk about them spending big money and I want that excitement and that buzz of having spent X amount. I don't know. Lots of people saying, read your chat and you'll see that you're very, very wrong. I mean, it's my opinion. I might be wrong. I might be proved wrong. Let's see. Let's see how this develops. Let's see what happens. But I can't sit here and pretend that when I read this, I started jumping up and down and going, oh my God, Arsenal are ready. We're ready to topple the champions. We're ready to go in that next step in the Champions League and go all the way and win it because we're bringing in Christian Norgard. And again, it's no disrespect to the player. It's the bigger picture. We still don't have a striker in. We still are no closer to bringing in, as far as we're aware, the winger that we all desperately need. We've made some moves in midfield that don't, in my opinion, at the very least, guarantee us improving as a team. And so, yeah, there's going to be concern. Let's bring you up to speed with exactly what David Ornstein's reported. Probably should have done that at the beginning, but got carried away ranting. He said Arsenal have made a bid worth 11 million euros, 9.3 million pounds for Brentford midfielder Christian Norgard. A North London club are exploring a deal for the 31-year-old while they await Brentford's response to the offer. Arsenal have not reached an agreement with Thomas Partey, whose contract is up on June 30th. And as it stands, the Ghanaian will leave the club as a free agent next week. Partey would be the second central midfielder to depart Arsenal this summer after Jorginho joined Brazilian side Flamengo on a free transfer. Although, as reported by The Athletic, they expect to sign Real Sociedad's Martin Zubimendi, with the Spanish international having visited London to meet officials next week. Norgard has 2 years remaining on his contract with Brentford. He's been a key player for the West London club since arriving from Fiorentina in the summer of 2019, reuniting with head coach Thomas Frank, who coached him at Brøndby and in the Danish youth setup. Earlier this month, Frank moved across London to join Tottenham. Operating in the heart of midfield, Norgard has made 192 appearances for Brentford in all comps, scoring 13 goals. He helped them to promotion to the Premier League at the end of his second season at the club and has grown in influence over the last 4 years in the top flight. It's a great story, Christian Norgard. It is. It really, really is. I don't know, man. I don't know. Like, I don't know how to feel about this. Honestly, I'm conflicted because, like, if I take my Arsenal hat off for a minute, I'm looking at it and I'm going Christian Norgard for £9 million. Obviously, it's probably going to end up being a little bit more than that. But if I take my Arsenal hat off and I look at that, I go, £9 million? Good deal. But if I put my Arsenal hat back on and I think about where we want to be, what it is we're looking to achieve, the final hurdle that remains in front of us, which is no doubt the most difficult of hurdles to overcome. Does this transfer help us in that mission? And does this transfer give me any more confidence that we'll get over the line? From what I know of Christian Norgard, I think he's I talked about it, good passer, good progressive passer, always looks for the progressive passes nice and early. Destroyer, strong, physical, powerful. Good in tight spaces. Not sure about that. In fact, I'd probably argue no. So, yeah, I don't know where to go on this. I don't know where to go on this, honestly. Yeah, I'm lost for words. And it's not often the case with me, but I am genuinely lost for words at this moment in time because I just, on the surface of it, and it is just a surface opinion right now, haven't had time to think about it. I'm just looking at it and going, don't really know how this assists us in the mission that we're setting out to accomplish this season. But yeah, let's see. Let's see what people are saying in the chat. Let's get loads of your thoughts and comments for the last 10 minutes or so. Leeds Gunner says, Harry's so normally level-headed. Very funny to see him flustered. I guess like my default position nowadays, and it has been the case for a while, is to kind of trust in what Arsenal are doing because they have made progress. But at the same time, like you go out and you bring in the best in class sporting director. You don't spend a great deal more than you recouped last summer. You then go into January where you desperately need to sign and you don't sign with a view to doing some big, significant, great business in the summer. And then you get to the summer and, okay, you've signed Martin Zubimendi and that was clearly in the works for a while. Good signing. You sign Kepa Arrizabalaga and now you're going to sign Christian Norgard. And at this moment in time, there's still no sign of a striker and there's still no sign of a winger. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean that that's a given, that that's how our window is going to end up. And I'm obviously open-minded to the possibility and the idea of Arsenal pursuing other, more glamorous, bigger deals in those attacking positions. And if you get those done, then all of a sudden the rest of the business feels far more okay. But it's just, you know, I'm bringing you a raw reaction to this. We are live, half an hour after this news dropped. And I'm struggling to see enough upside to be able to kind of sit there and really kind of strongly back this. Like when we bought Jorginho in, I was like, oh, okay. You know, Jorginho's probably not going to play regularly, but I can see why you like Jorginho. And I can see why you think he'd be a good addition to the squad. He's got experience at the highest level. Now, Christian Norgaard's got experience, but not anywhere near the level that Jorginho had. So if you're playing the experience card, I'm not really buying that. In terms of the role, I think the roles are going to be quite similar. I think Norgard will be a backup, and I think Jorginho was a backup, and that was fine. And in terms of the fee, there's some similarities as well. I wasn't totally sold on the Jorginho thing at the time. I thought it could potentially turn out to be a good bit of business. And in the end, I think it was. But I was never dismissive of it. So I don't want to be dismissive of Christian Norgard. I'll stress the point again. It's not about Christian Norgard, the individual or the person. It's about the bigger picture. And when you look at what we've done so far, it feels like we're in the mindset of maintenance rather than the mindset of improvement. And that worries me a little bit. Inspired Channel says, are we forgetting that we have Rice and Odegaard and even Marino? No, we're not forgetting, but we want to make the team better. So he says, people have their opinions on if it's a good or bad deal, but the difference between the players we are signing and who City and Liverpool are signing shows the difference in ambition between us and them. You couldn't have put that better. Like that is bang on the nail. What's that phrase? You've hit the nail on the head. You're bang on there. Look at what Liverpool are doing. Look at what Manchester City are doing. Then look at what we're doing. And then tell me that people shouldn't be feeling frustrated. Now, I'll always caveat that frustration with, hey, that frustration, that mindset, it could be a temporary mindset because in the not too distant future, we could do business that completely changes the complexion of our upcoming season and completely changes the outlook on that transfer window. But when Liverpool are going and breaking the bank to bring in Florian Wirtz, bringing in really, really impressive fullbacks, and Arsenal are bringing in a backup goalkeeper on the cheap, and then, you know, Martin Zubimendi is a good signing. I'm not denying that one. I have to keep saying that before people take it the wrong way. But then our third signing looks like it could be Christian Norgard from Brentford. You can understand why people aren't particularly inspired and why they don't feel that that's the kind of business that will move the needle for us. Paul James says, Norgard is another Jorginho/Trossard. We were underwhelmed when they were signed, but quickly they proved their worth. He probably will prove his worth as a squad player. But my point remains valid in my view anyway. Is he a needle mover? No. So why don't we get the needle movers in first? Why don't we put the resource and all our efforts into getting the needle movers first. And we might be doing that, who knows? But, you know, as a fan, you can understand why this is. If we had got all our signings in and then we heard that Christian Norgard was coming in for 10 million quid, you'd go, oh, okay, that's a good bit of business. This is the point. Perception is everything. Now, as a football club, you can't always control when certain stories come out, and you can't control the timing of certain announcements. And therefore, you can't always control the narrative. But I think as a football club, you've got to understand, you have to understand why there will be Arsenal fans out there looking at this and going, not sure about this. Okaya says that Harry loves shiny new toys with great names like Optimus Prime. Mr. Iguana says Rice, Zubimendi, Marino, and Norgard midfielder depth. And then you've got Odegaard and you've got Ethan Nwaneri. Yeah, that makes sense. In terms of looking at the list of names, yeah, volume-wise, numbers-wise, it's good. But is there not a better midfielder out there that we could have got in or could have moved for? I don't know. Clinton McCutcheon says absolutely nothing wrong with Norgard at £9 million. I don't think Brentford are going to accept a £9 million bid, by the way. Like, let's just make that point. Okay, and a good question to throw at you guys then is this. If Christian Norgard is good value at £9 million, at what price do you walk away from the signing? So what's your absolute maximum that you would pay for Christian Norgard? Because mine is like 15, and I'm not going any further than that. Not going any further than that at all. That is my absolute limit. So I'm interested to know what people's limits are around Christian Norgard. Sam says, Harry, you need to chill, man. Zubi will transform us. Partey could easily be injured all season. Norgard won't be a regular starter. Rather him than Jorginho going forwards. Well, I understand that I'm probably overreacting a little bit. I know that. This is what happens to me. This is why I don't do post-match podcasts directly after the full-time whistle anymore. And instead, I wait till the next day. I realize that because I care deeply for this football club and I am a fan first and foremost, that I get a little bit overly emotional at times. But like, there's a couple of points in your point that I would just kind of touch on. So first, Zubimendi will transform us. Zubimendi could transform us, but he could also struggle to adapt at the beginning. Partey could easily be injured all season. That's absolutely true. And Norgard won't be a regular starter. You'd rather him than Jorginho going forwards. On what planet did Christian Norgard overtake Jorginho as a footballer? I don't get that. Look at their careers. Compare them. In fact, there is no comparison whatsoever. Is it because physically people feel that Jorginho has sort of dwindled in his powers a little bit? Maybe, but I'd argue that he never really had that stuff in the first place. It was always about his intelligence, his positioning, his ability to pass. Vig says, our best games, we had Rice and Jorginho, and we've got Zubimendi. Clearly, Rice and Zubimendi is the plan. Norgard is just the backup. I would have preferred a Gume, but this is not bad. Overblown reaction. Again, in isolation, I don't think Christian Norgard's a bad player. But I can't help but be, maybe not worried because it's too early in the window, but I can't help but be a little bit baffled by some of these signings at this stage. Paul James says, if Partey was to stay, would you agree bringing in Norgard strengthens the midfield? Yeah, I would. Sir Nicholas says, I can't listen to the lack of perspective right now. This is the first time I'm getting slated in the chat for being negative. My, how the tables have turned. Inspired Channels just brought up a report from Isan Khan in which he says Mikel Arteta wants to bring in a striker before their pre-season tour of Singapore and Hong Kong, which they fly out for on July the 19th. Arsenal's priority is Benjamin Sesko. So again, it's that, swinging from one way to the other. Yesterday it was Gyökeres, today it's Sesko. Who knows? Just scrolling through the chat, just picking up some of your comments. Look, I think what I'll do, because there's clearly a mixed bag in terms of what people think about this. There's a lot of people that think great bit of business. There's a lot of people that think no. I think if I bring you my kind of summary here, because I do have to dash. This is the second episode we're doing today. Look, I think for me, if Thomas Partey's leaving, there's no doubt that we have to replace him. And there's no doubt now in my mind that Zubimendi's coming in as the number one. And if Partey stayed, he would have been the number two. But I will not have it that Christian Norgard is a better player or even as good a player as Thomas Partey. Therefore, we are downgrading. In some way, you know, we are downgrading. Now, I realize that you don't know if Thomas Partey is going to be fit. I realize that there is that risk, but you don't know that Zubimendi is going to be fit. You don't know that Norgard's going to be fit. Your injuries strike seemingly at our club more often than in most places. My point here is that we've not... Look, maybe we can't upgrade on Thomas Partey this summer. Maybe we can't because we need to spend money in other areas. And if you're talking about those attacking positions, they are more often than not the most difficult positions to recruit for because the expense is incredibly high. But at the same time, you want to try and find a player that can at least mirror Thomas Partey's level. Otherwise, you are downgrading. In which case, why is anybody happy with that? How can people deny that Thomas Partey is a better midfielder than Christian Norgard? That's the bit I'm really struggling to get my head around at the moment. That's the bit I'm really, really frustrated with. Because in losing Thomas Partey, which I don't want to see happen, by the way, I would have signed him up. I've said it before, I'll say it again. We need to go out and get someone else in. And I would have been underwhelmed if it was a Gume. I'm underwhelmed with it being Norgard. And James is saying we're not comparing them to. I think, what are you referring to, Partey and Norgard? Of course we've got to compare the two. Because we're losing one and bringing in another. And they play in the same position. So, of course, we've got to make that comparison. Of course, we've got to look at it through that lens. Zubimendi coming in is a great thing, and I'm happy with that. I am. But you can't pretend that the comparison between Thomas Partey and Christian Norgard is irrelevant when he would literally be coming in to replace Thomas Partey. How is it irrelevant? It is absolutely relevant to make that comparison. But anyway, we'll leave it there. We'll leave it there. I know I'm going to spark quite a bit of debate in the comments with what I've been saying today. Again, nothing against Christian Norgard as an individual. I think he's a good player. I think he's a very good squad player, and I think he could fit in nicely as long as we make sure that we get all the other bits and pieces that we need to do done. But my initial reaction is Partey is a bloody good 6. Zubimendi's coming in as his direct replacement. But with him still technically at the club and with there still being an opportunity to get him signed up on a new contract, you're losing him to bring in someone like Christian Norgard. And I just, at this moment in time, I can't see how that makes us a better team. Just my view. Unpopular. I don't care. That's my view. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. As always, don't forget to leave a like on the video if you haven't done so already, even if you disagree with me, but you're a regular listener, viewer. I'd really, really appreciate that. Subscribe and all the rest of it. And I'll see you all very, very soon. Until the next one, take care of yourselves. Have a great day. Goodbye.